Sitting in the public inquiry day after day, ostensibly taking notes, I observe a lot of stuff. And one of the things I've learned is that there's a noticeable gap between telling the truth and or landing an idea with the targeted listeners to give them the impression that they have a true understanding of events. They say a good barrister doesn't need to tell an untruth, that their skill lies in selecting facts and then framing them, emphasising some, minimising others, until the listening quarry is guided towards a particular conclusion. Much of the debate since the beginning of the inquiry is more an argument about what the facts mean rather than arguing against the facts, if you see what I mean. I suppose it comes down to a battle over definitions, really. They do this in a number of different ways, and I think it would be a good exercise for folk attending the public inquiry to see, can they spot when the barristers are up to their tricks, which are many and can look like some of the following. What facts help my case here for Dalradian? Are they legally relevant? And then what facts would create the strongest narrative to get that across to the commissioners? I imagine this is the discussion going on in the barristers' heads. Here's a question. Can we third parties begin to notice when barristers frame some of the facts in different ways? Classic examples come to mind. This one is about the release of water from the mine processing back into the Owen Calloo. And we were told that the water would be even cleaner than it was before. So what does clean mean in this context? Will it support life? Or is it clean as in an acid bath? You get my drift. What other techniques are they using? Let's see. They're good at weaving lists of facts into a good story, creating the most convincing legal argument. That the facts could hardly be any other way. Notice too that the barristers often like to have the last word. The commissioners are left with the resounding echo of their final thoughts on the subject. Other times the barristers become strategically ambiguous. And this was in evidence today when I believe Beattie said at one juncture, "It's not clear how mining will adversely affect language heritage." Here, he manages to shift the question from proving mining won't affect heritage to questioning the certainty of the adverse effect on heritage, as already more than adequately presented by third parties in their statement of case. Coming back to the skill of reframing, every argument will have its weak points, or bad facts as they're known, and watching the applicant's barristers jump through the hoops to give them a different interpretation is sometimes amusing, other times downright worrying. Do they really believe this shit? Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. For example, Baroni today, another advocate for Dalradian, spent some time endeavouring to reframe the bad fact that there was no community consultation carried out whatsoever around cultural heritage. He used the following as examples as to how this was done. One public session at the mine, the publishing of company publicity on the website, and some marketing material. And then even had the temerity to say, because we're talking about it right now, that this was community engagement. Like, how desperate do you have to get to use that as a reframing strategy, using different other facts to arrive at the same meaning? And just by the by, he went on to make sweeping generalisations about how there would be no impact on language or community, cohesion and folklore. Fortunately, in the room with us, we had Dr. Vincenza Sirifus, who easily dismantled his argument, bad fact by bad fact. She specialises in community consultation. But getting back to the business of reframing, I think it'd be a good game to see how many times we can spot the barristers at this. We'd like an adult form of I Spy. We could even put our hand up and shout reframe so that commissioners really get it. Laugh out loud. Seriously though, one of the things we as third parties need to be alert to throughout this inquiry is not necessarily what has been said, but what has not been said. We need to notice when important context is omitted, when speculation begins to be treated as established fact, and when a particular impression is being created, without anyone ever having to utter a literal untruth. For example, if we spend hours talking mitigation measures for dust and noise and traffic, but little time discussing whether communities should have to live with those impacts in the first place, or when human rights is placed as a catch-up question at the very end of a 3-day session, these omissions shape this narrative of the whole inquiry. And when predictions about future environmental performance are presented with great confidence, it's worth remembering that they are still forecasts and assumptions, not established facts. The future has not happened yet. And if people are repeatedly referred to as receptors, impacts are described as manageable and risks are characterised as acceptable, listeners can be left with impressions that everything is under control, even though other folk might reach a very different conclusion when looking at exactly the same evidence. Now, I'll be the first to say I'm not used to listening to barristers. And early on in the inquiry, I used to come away thinking I've heard the whole story, when in reality, I was coming away with a carefully constructed interpretation of the facts, as laid down by the particular barrister on the day. Take today, for instance, with the open question for the applicant, that the third parties have pointed out that the cultural heritage assessment methodology is fundamentally flawed and is not consistent with professional principles, is outdated, too narrow in focus, and has the applicant anything to add to that? And Mr. Long, yet another barrister, went on for a long time, really just reading over what methodology they had used in their submission, which everyone in the room was already aware of. Commissioner Donaghy had to ask him 3 times was there anything else he wanted to add to this. Finally, right at the end, he remarked that the work on the extraction site and exploration site can't have an impact, as it was all subsurface. This made Donaghy sit up and pay attention, questioning him again. Everything in this area is subsurface? ? And Beattie sees his chance to focus on the facts which could help his case, and speaking like he was an expert mine manager, I believe said that there is no surface drilling in the exploration area and underground, and it will not come within 100 metres of the surface. At this point, I would like to remind the listeners that we're talking about cultural heritage, not the intricacies of mining. Gordon, another barrister, gets in on the action, muttering something about an update in some document somewhere and that the drilling will not come above 100 metres. Commissioner Donaghy was quick enough to ask, was it on the document or did you infer it? Reminding him to focus on the question. Anyways, I've gone on a bit long with this, so I'm going to wrap it up. I only meant to give it a couple of lines as an opener for the day. Just as a by-the-by, most of the day was spent talking about cultural heritage. But, as Emma McAleer remarked, that you would never have guessed that heritage was anything other than built heritage, with little or no attention given to intangible heritage. Again here, we can see how the narrative is being altered. I suppose one point worth noting is that for the very first time, a government department, Historical Environmental Division HED, actively backed the third-party concerns along with Mid-Ulster District Council and Fermanagh and Omagh District Council. That's it for today. Thanks a million for listening, and we'll see you all again soon. And don't forget, if you're listening regularly, follow the podcast on Spotify or leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and it really helps more people find the show and keep these conversations moving further out into the world.